Imperium, The Philosophy of History and Politics, Chapter 13, The Imperative of Our Age. By surveying the entire previous happening of the world, Western man understands himself in his 20th century phase. He sees where he stands. He sees also why it was that he was impelled to orient himself historically. His inner instinct forbade that he distort history in the materialistic fashion by subjecting it to an ideology of some kind. He sees the ages of previous cultures, to which his present phase is related, the period of the contending states in the Chinese, the transition to Caesarism in the Roman, the Hyksos era in the Egyptian. None of them are ages of the flowering of art or philosophy. All have their center of gravity in politics and action. They are the periods of large space thinking, of the greatest deeds, of external creativeness of the highest possible magnitude. Philosophers and ideologists, world improvers and art traders slip down to the street level in these ages, when the imperative is directed to action and not to abstract thought. Because of his historical position, in a civilization at the beginning of its second phase, his soul has a certain organic predisposition, and the custodians of the idea of this time will of necessity think and feel thus, and not otherwise. It can be definitively stated what this relationship is to the various forms of human and cultural thought and action. To religion, this age is once more affirmative, the very opposite of the negative atheism of materialism. Every man of action is in constant contact with the unforeseeable, the imponderable, the mystery of life, and this precludes the laboratory attitude on his part. An age of action lives side by side with death, and values life by its attitude toward death. The old Gothic religious idea is still with us. It is at his last moment that a man shows what is in him in its purity. Though he may have lived a wastrel, he may die a hero. And it is this last act of his life that creates the image of him that will survive in the minds of his descendants. We cannot possibly value a life according to its length, as materialism did, or believe in any doctrine of immortality of the body. Between his earthly task and his relationship to God, there is no conflict for Western man. At the beginning of a battle, it is the custom of soldiers to pray. The battle is the foreground. That toward which the prayer is directed is the transcendent, is God. Our metaphysical imperative has to be fulfilled within a certain life framework. We have been born into a certain culture, at a certain phase of its organic development. We have certain gifts. These condition the earthly task which we must perform. The metaphysical task is beyond any conditioning, for it would have been the same in any age anywhere. The earthly task is merely the form of the higher task, its organic vehicle. To philosophy, the spirit of the age has its own attitude, different from all previous centuries. Its great organizing principle is the morphological significance of systems and events. It rests upon no critical method, for all these critical methods merely reflected the prevalent spirit, and its spirit has outgrown criticism. The center of its thought life is in history. By history, we orient ourselves. We see the significance of the previous centuries of our own culture. We understand beyond any system or ideology the nature of what we have to do. We see the significance of our own inmost feelings and imperative. For systems of world improvement, products of a type of thinking which has become old-fashioned, this age has no use. It is interested solely in what must be done and what can be done, and not at all in what ought to be done. The world of action has its own organic rhythms, and ideologies belong to the world of thought. Living ideas interest us. Stillborn ideals do not. To art, the age can have only one attitude. At best, our artistic tasks are secondary. At worst, art has degenerated to frightfulness and chaos. Mass clangor is not music. Pictorial nightmares are not even draftsmanship, let alone the art of painting. Obscenity and ugliness are not literature. Materialistic propaganda is not drama. Disconnected words thrown formlessly onto paper are not lyric poetry. Whatever art tasks the age has to fulfill will be carried out by individuals acting quietly within old Western traditions, not noising themselves about with journalistic art theories. In an age of action and organization, legal thought reaches a new development. Western law will not stand outside the age of politics, with its accompanying thought forms of history and psychology. It will be entirely renewed with these ideas, and its old materialism in public law, commercial, and in particular in criminal law will be thrown into the discard. Technics and its handmade, science, are of high importance to the Western civilization in its present phase. Technics must provide Western politics with a strong fist for the coming struggles. Into the social structure of the Western civilization, there will be infused the principle of authority, supplanting the principle of wealth. This view is not at all hostile to private property or private management. That belongs to the negative feeling of hatred and jealousy which inform class war. The 20th century idea liquidates class war, as it does the idea of economics being the determining force in our life. Economics occupies the position in the new edifice of the foundation, and its spiritual importance is indicated thereby. The foundation is not the important thing in a structure, but strictly secondary. But, in an age of action, economic strength is indispensable to political units. Economics can be a source of political strength, can serve sometimes as a weapon in the power struggle. For these reasons, the 20th century will not neglect the development of the economic side of life, but will provide it with a new impetus from the now dominant idea of politics. Instead of economics being the sphere wherein individuals battled one another for private spoils, it becomes now a strong and important side of the political organism which is the custodian of the destiny of all. The view of the 20th century toward the various directions of thought and action is not arbitrary, any more than that of previous ages was. Most of the best minds of the 19th century were nihilistic in tendency, sensualistic, rationalistic, materialistic, because the age was one of crisis in the culture life, and these ideas were the spirit of the age. Similarly, the idea of political nationalism was self-evident to that age, but that too was a product of the great crisis, thus a form of disease, as destructive as it was necessary. Every juncture of organic happening presents a choice and an alternative. The choice is to do the necessary. The alternative is chaos. This has nothing to do with schoolbook logic. That logic is just one of the numberless products of life, and life will always invent as many logics as it has need for. But life will always obey one logic. Organic logic. This is not describable by any system, but can be comprehended by destiny thinking, the only form of thought serviceable to action. Life goes forward or it goes nowhere. Opposition to the spirit of the age is the will to nothingness. In the realm of theory, this age has as many alternatives as it has ideologists to dream them up. In the realm of fact, it has only one choice, and that is delineated for it by the life phase of the civilization, and the outer circumstances in which we find ourselves at the moment. We know that the transition of one age into the next is gradual, and we know that even as it has fulfilled itself in some directions, it thinks it is just beginning in others. Thus, while science as a mental discipline has achieved its goal, science as a popular outlook for fools and uncreative persons continues to exist. Materialism no longer claims any of the best minds, but the best minds are not in control at this moment. The West is dominated by the outer world, in the control of barbarians and distorters, and they find the least valuable minds of Europe most serviceable to them. Materialism serves the great cause of destroying Europe, and that is why it is forced on the populations of Europe by the extra-European forces. There are two ways in which we are sensible of our great task. Our ethical imperative which claims our lives. First, from our inward feeling, which impels us to look at things this way and no other. Secondly, from our knowledge of history of 7 previous high cultures, each of which went through this same crisis, and each of which liquidated the long civilization crisis in precisely the way that our instincts tell us ours is to be resolved. Imperium, Chapter 13, Section 2. Our momentary situation takes the form of a great battle, a battle which may take more than one war to resolve it, or which may be resolved by sudden cataclysmic happening, entirely unforeseeable to us now. On the surface of history, it is the unforeseen that happens. The most human beings can do is to be prepared inwardly. In complete contradiction to our instinct, feelings, and ideas, the 19th century sits leering upon the throne of Europe, wrapped in the cerements of the grave, and propped up by the extra-European forces. This means that the age in which we find ourselves takes the form of a deep and fundamental conflict. These ideas can never live again. Their supremacy merely means the strangulation of the young, living tendencies of the new Europe. Their supremacy simply consists in forced lip service to them. They do not affect the action thinking, the organic rhythms of the age. They are merely instruments of thwarting the will of Europe by holding it in subjection to the least valuable elements in Europe, who are maintained in power by extra-European bayonets. The conflict is far-reaching. It affects every sphere of life. Two ideas are opposed, not concepts or abstraction, but ideas, which were in the blood of men before they were formulated by the minds of men. The resurgence of authority stands opposed to the rule of money, order to social chaos, hierarchy to equality, socio-economico-political stability to constant flux, glad assumption of duties to whining for rights, socialism to capitalism, ethically, economically, politically, the rebirth of religion to materialism, fertility to sterility, the spirit of heroism to the spirit of trade, the principle of responsibility to parliamentarianism, the idea of polarity of man and woman to feminism, the idea of the individual task to the ideal of happiness, discipline to propaganda compulsion, the higher unities of family, society, state to social atomism, marriage to the communistic ideal of free love, economic self-sufficiency to senseless trade as an end in itself, the inner imperative to rationalism. But the greatest opposition of all has not yet been named, the conflict which will take up all the others into itself. This is the battle of the idea of the unity of the West against the nationalism of the 19th century. Here stand opposed the ideas of empire and petty statism, large space thinking and political provincialism. Here find themselves opposed the miserable collection of yesterday patriots and the custodians of the future. The yesterday nationalists are nothing but the puppets of the extra-European forces who conquer Europe by dividing it. To the enemies of Europe, there must be no rapprochement, no understanding, no union of the old units of Europe into a new unit, capable of carrying on 20th century politics. In the previous 7 high cultures, the period of the nationalistic disease was liquidated by the spread of one feeling over the whole civilization. It was not unaccompanied by wars, for the past has always, and will always, fight against the future. Life is war, and to wish to create is to bring about the opposition of the great naysayers, those whose existence is tied to the past, is sunk into the past. The division of the civilization was in each case resolved by the reunion of the civilization, the reassertion of its old, original, exclusiveness and unity. In each case, from petty statism came empire. The empire idea was so strong that no inner force could oppose it with hope of success. Nationalism itself in Europe transformed itself into the new empire idea after the First World War, the beginning of our age. In each Western country, the nationalists were those who were opposed to another European war, and who desired a general political understanding in Europe to prevent its sinking into the dust where it now struggles. They were thus not nationalistic at all, but Western imperial. Similarly, the self-styled internationalists were the ones who wished to stir up wars among the European states of yesterday in order to sabotage the creation of the empire of the West. They hated it because they were alien to it in one way or another. Some because they were completely outside the Western culture, others because they were incurably possessed by some ideology or other which hated the new, vital, masculine form of the future, and preferred the old conception of life as money-chasing, money-spending, hatred of strong, ascendant life, and love of weakness, sterility, and stupidity. And thus, the extra-European forces, together with their traitorous inner elements in Europe, were able to bring about a Second World War, which defeated on the surface the powerful development of Western Empire. But the defeat was, and had to be, only on the surface, since the decisive impulse, as this century knows once more, comes always from within, from the inner imperative, from the soul. To defeat on the surface the actualization of an idea that is historically essential is to strengthen it. Its energy, that would have been diffusing itself outward in self-expression, turns inward and is concentrated onto the primary task of spiritual liberation. The materialists do not know what does not destroy, make stronger, and destroy this idea they cannot. It uses men, but they cannot use it, touch it, injure it. This whole work is nothing but an outline of the idea of this age, a presentation of its foundations and universality, and every spiritual root of it will be traced to its origins and necessity. But in this place it should be mentioned that the idea of a universal Europe, an empire of the West, is not new, but is the prime form of our culture, as of every other. For the first 5 centuries of our culture, there was a universal Western people, in which the local differences counted but slightly. There was a universal king-emperor, who might have been often defied, but was not denied. There was a universal style, Gothic, which inspired and formed all art from furniture to the cathedral. There was a universal code of conduct, Western chivalry, with its honor imperative for every situation. There was a universal religion and a universal church. There was a universal language, Latin, and a universal law, Roman law. The disintegration of this unity was slowly progressive from 1250 onward, but was not entirely accomplished, even for political purposes, until the age of political nationalism, beginning circa 1750, when Westerners for the first time allowed themselves to use the barbarian against other Western nations. And now, as we enter upon the late civilization phase, the idea of a universal Europe, an empire of the West in the 20th century style, emerges once more as the single, great, formative idea of the age. The form in which the task presents itself is political. It is a power question whether this empire will be established, for strong extra-European forces oppose it, and these forces have divided the soil of our culture between them. Imperium chapter 13, section 3. The Empire of the West is a development that no inter-European force could possibly oppose with more than token resistance, but its establishment is now crossed by the decisive intervention of outer forces in the life of the West. The struggle is thus spiritual-political, and its motive force derives from the idea of Western unity. At this moment, the existence of the West in freedom for self-development is a function of the distribution of power in the world. The age is political in a sense that no previous Western age has been so. This is the age of absolute politics, for the whole form of our life is now a function of power. Action, to be effective, must be within a spiritual framework. As Goethe said, unlimited activity, of whatever kind, leads at last to bankruptcy. Our action must not be blind. Our ideational equipment must be of a kind which can turn everything to its own account. It frees itself therefore from every kind of ideology, economic, biological, moralistic. It springs directly from the fact sense, which this age takes as its point of departure. In the universities and in most of the books, outmoded methods of looking at the field of politics are presented. The doctrine is still taught that there are various forms of government which can be moved about from one political unit to another. There is republicanism, there is democracy, monarchy, and so on and so on. Some of these forms are held out as good, others as bad. It is better to have Europe occupied by the barbarian than to have a Western empire under a bad form of government. It is better to eat the rations that Moscow and Washington allow than it is to have a proud and free Europe with a bad government. This is the very height of stupidity. Asininity on this level can only be reached by ideologists without soul and without intellect. This sort of thing is book politics, and is traceable to the fact that the word politics has two meanings. It means human power activity, and it also has the dictionary meaning of a branch of philosophy. Now, if by politics one means a branch of philosophy, very well. It can then turn into whatever one wishes. Carte blanche reigns in the world of philosophy. But the real meaning of the word politics is power activity, and in this sense, acting life is itself politics. In this sense, facts rule politics, and the making of facts is the task of politics. This is the only possible meaning of the word to the 20th century, and this most serious moment of our cultural life demands the utmost clarity of the minds of active men in order that they might be entirely free from any trace of ideology, whether derived from logic, philosophy, or morality. And thus we stand before the view of politics, which answers the inner demand of the age of absolute politics.